So I think your question was, how does this interact with the potential red line extension at Alkale Gardens and also NICD? There's a lot of different ways of approaching how to use this asset that we have. The core piece of what we're saying is that there needs to be a plan, and somebody should be coordinating that plan, and that in order to be effective within the urban areas, transit needs to be every 10 to 15 minutes. And how you coordinate all these things needs to be part of the planning process. So, thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
And here's your party gift. Really appreciate it. So next up is Dan Johnson. Dan has been our go-to guy in Springfield for over 10 years now, a key part of many of the successes that we've had in the last decade. So I'll leave it up to Dan.
Thank you. So it's my pleasure. I get the best part of the day. I get to introduce our keynote speaker today. I want to give you the 60 seconds on Springfield. As you know, we've got we're in uncharted territory. There's no budget for 8 months now, and so the operating budget has been there's a lot of pressure. The good news is the governor did introduce another document in February. Unlike last year's document, which cut the Amtrak line item specifically, this one increased the Amtrak line item to $50 million. So we think the direct threat to Amtrak's line item is sort of receded. We were afraid that maybe the governor may have been, pointing to Amtrak as something that he specifically wanted to cut a year ago. This year, that direct threat seems to be gone. And on the operating side, we're just sort of part of the general problem that since we've cut taxes a year and a half ago, there's not enough money to pay the bills, and Amtrak, like every other vendor, what are we going to do? And we're part of that big picture question of what to do about it. Same on the capital side. It's hard to have a capital discussion until we get the operating budget figured out. So we are not, we're sort of in line with everybody else. We're not worse off, which is the good news, but we're not sort of better off. Everybody's having a tough time in Illinois right now. So that was the quick and dirty what's going on in Illinois. But what's extremely exciting is to have among champions around the country, people that know what high-speed rail is, believe in it, understand the role of transit in invigorating communities and cares about long-range planning. We have a champion with us, a native of St. Paul, Minnesota, the Cook County Board President. It's my honor to introduce one of our great friends, Toni Preckwinkle.
So, good morning, and thank you for inviting me today. I really appreciate it. As some of you know, I come from a railroad family. My grandfather and two of my uncles worked on the railroads in St. Paul, Minnesota, Great Northern and Northern Pacific, precursors to Burlington Northern Santa Fe. So, as I said, I come from a railroad family. And when I was first elected alderman in 1991, here's where I admit I'm a policy wonk. I thought, well, one of the things I need to know is about our local economy. And so I began to look at high-speed rail, knowing that Chicago was a rail center and knowing from my own experience how important railroads were. So I've had a long-term interest in high-speed rail. And I'm grateful to all of you for the good work that you're doing, striving to connect Chicago to other Midwestern cities with speedy train service. Let me say that I find the concept of high-speed rail intriguing, and as I said, that interest goes back at least to 1991 when I was first elected alderman. The notion that we could move passengers at light speed from city to city is a very attractive one. But like many other innovations, it takes a lot of hard work to bring it into fruition. And we all know that there's a lot of competition for a finite amount of transportation dollars. Since taking office as president of Cook County, I've worked to change the focus of the county's transportation goals to make sure our mission is aligned with the growth of our region's economy. For that reason, the county is now putting finishing touches on its long-range transportation plan. Some of you may be aware of it. The first time in 75 years that we look seriously at our transportation assets and challenges. So let me tell you a little story that reflects the challenges that I met when I came in the door, it seemed to me that it didn't make sense just to have a Department of Highways, that we needed to have a broader view. So we changed the name of the department from Department of Highways to the Department of Transportation and Highways. Both because we needed a broader view and because that's the only way that you can get federal dollars for transportation. You have to have a transportation department. So we did the first thing. And then U.S. Department of Transportation said, okay, so that's a good idea, you have a transportation department, but you actually have to have a transportation plan. You can't just do one-off projects. You have to have a plan for your region. So I talked to John Yonan, our superintendent of transportation and highways. And I said, look, they want a transportation plan. Let's just go find the last one and update it. So there was a long search for the last plan. They finally found one behind a filing cabinet, and it was from 1940. That's the last time the county had a transportation plan. But let me say that that transportation plan, before any of our highways in this region were built, laid out the network that you see today. So that plan was prophetic. And as we looked at transportation planning in our region now, we wanted to try to come up with the same kind of prophetic document. So three realities have shaped our thinking. First, the purpose of transportation is to support our economy and create livable communities. Transportation gets workers to work, shoppers to stores, students to schools, goods to factories, finished products to consumers. It enables the creation of a stronger economy and better communities, but it's not an end in itself. Second, transportation systems are multimodal and multi-purpose. Our airports generate truck and rail traffic. Our rail transit systems compete with freight rail shipments. Our roads are shared by auto travelers and by a growing stream of trucks. Out-of-town visitors arriving at Union Station or our airports need to get to their final destination. It's essential to consider all these modes and how they connect to each other as part of an integrated system. Third, the responsibility for building and maintaining transportation systems involves multiple public and private organizations. Some of you know that Illinois has more units of government than any other state in the country. It won't surprise you to know that in Illinois, transportation is the responsibility of 2,857 units of government. In Cook County alone, there are 150 units of government that use taxpayer dollars to provide you with transportation services. We have to work together in order to provide you with the services you expect. As we began our planning process, we confirmed what we already knew, that the Chicago region is the transportation center of North America. This is the result of our central location, but it's also the result of public and private investments made over the last 2 centuries, 200 years. The leadership position that we've had has created jobs and profits for businesses that operate here, but more importantly, it supports an economy that depends on our superior transportation systems. We also confirmed that our competitive advantage is beginning to erode. Competitor regions have invested more in roads, rail lines, ports, and airports. And our competitors are no longer simply New York or Los Angeles or Houston, but cities like Hong Kong, London, Paris, Singapore, Tokyo, and Zurich that have a very fundamental level of understanding of the importance of linking their residents and economies to those of other global cities around the world. There's little doubt that being the hub of a high-speed rail system would restore some of our competitive advantage. But we also have to acknowledge that Cook County and Chicago and the Chicago region have a large backlog of transportation projects that we need to address. We have to recognize the many trends that are shaping the market for transportation. And these include the region will grow by 30% by 2040, and that growth will place new and different demands on our transportation assets. A growing share of our population will be over 65, like me, many of whom will be looking for alternatives to driving. There are other trends. In 1991, 80% of 16 to 24-year-olds had a driver's license. In 2011, only 67% bothered to get a license. The numbers of cars and trucks per person has declined, and the number of annual miles driven per per vehicle has also declined over the last decade. The trend is obvious. New technology is making it easier for people to share cars, share bikes, or use other services such as Uber, Lyft, and others. Technology is making it easier to use an app or a computer to buy things rather than actually go to the store and have them delivered within a day, sometimes within an hour. All this avoids trips to the mall, to the grocery store, or the restaurant. But it means additional truck trips on the region's road networks. Smart cars and smart highways are beyond the experimental stage. They promise to make driving safer and have the potential to make our roads less congested. More could be added to the list, but in our zeal to fix our transportation systems, we cannot ignore technological trends and changing consumer preferences that will reshape the transportation landscape. I'm convinced that we need to spend more on transportation. We're falling behind other regions in the country and around the world, and this will ultimately harm our economy. On the local level, I took a significant first step toward increased transportation funding by ensuring that we end diversions from the Cook County's motor fuel tax funds. Let me say, all units of government across the state do this. We were spending motor fuel tax dollars on our criminal justice system where there was a great need, which was permissible, but I concluded that it didn't make long-term sense. So beginning in our fiscal year 2017 budget, there will be an additional $45 million available in motor fuel tax dollars that will go to transportation investments. So we will entirely stop diverting motor fuel tax funds to other purposes. I think it's time that the state followed our lead and ended their practice of diverting transportation funds as well. The state should also legislate an increase in the gas tax and index that rate to inflation. I would support that effort if it converted the dollars into a united transportation fund so that we could give equal consideration to roads, bridges, transit, pedestrian service, trails, intercity passenger service, and freight rail. 3 years ago, as I said, I renamed our Department of Highways the Department of Transportation and Highways and asked it to address all our transportation needs. To do that, I need flexible funding that is not tied to a single mode of transportation. There are 5.2 million residents in Cook County, 128,000 businesses. Governments have a central role to play in providing good transportation, but no government can do it alone. And again, we have 150 units of government in Cook County that provide transportation services of one kind or another. So trying to get people to work together and cooperate is no easy task. I pledge to work with all the governments that operate within the county as well as the private sector to create a transportation system that will improve the quality of our lives and the health of our economy. How high-speed rail fits into this system will depend on the hard work of everybody in this room, clearly demonstrating to decision makers that many of us see high-speed rail as an intriguing option and that this has broad and real-time support, and that we have to ensure that our leaders have the political will to make the difficult decisions and steps that it will take to make this happen. Thank you very much. Do you want me to answer questions, or? If you could, yeah. Sure, I'd be happy to.
Members of the board, and Greg can come up here, so right before she leaves, we'll take another picture.
I just have a question about, you were talking about political will. So the biggest problem is if a politician says, we need to raise taxes to pay for infrastructure, then immediately their opponent comes in and says, with an attack ad, we're going to raise, this person wants to raise your taxes. That's why you've got to vote against them. How do you combat that? Because they haven't done it on the federal level with the transportation, with the gas tax hasn't been raised since 1993. How do you combat that?
Well, my temptation is to say with difficulty, but so let me give you an example. We were faced with a pension crisis in Cook County, just as the city and the state and other units of government in the state have a pension crisis. Our inability to get legislation passed in Springfield meant that we were accruing additional debt at the rate of $1 million a day. So after 2 years of trying to get pension reform in Springfield, I talked to my staff and I said, we're just going to have to raise taxes ourselves because we can't continue on in this circumstance where our inaction is costing our children and our grandchildren $1 million a day. So with a great deal of difficulty, we got 9 votes to raise the sales tax 1% so that we'd have the resources to deal with our pension crisis. The overwhelming majority of the money went to that purpose. A relatively more modest amount went to support our criminal justice system so we would stop diversion of our motor fuel tax money. But we had to make the case to our commissioners and then get the 9 votes, 9 out of 17 votes that we needed to make it happen. Now, I won't promise that should I run for re-election in 2018, I won't get the stuffing beat out of me for this. But I was prepared to make the case to the commissioners and to the public that what we were doing was the responsible thing. And, you know, I think we have to encourage our elected officials to be responsible, and that means that we have to support people who make difficult decisions to raise resources to provide important services. And as I said, I don't pretend that that's easy, but we have to work to change the paradigm on this subject. Just as in the criminal justice arena, you know, for decades in this country, the motto was you had to be tough on crime. You know, longer sentences for everything, more things criminalized. And what we've done is create a country where we have 5% of the world's population and 25% of the people in jail or prison in the entire world. 5% of the world's population and 25% of the people in the entire world who are in jail or prison. At a stupendous cost. So, you know, if you're an elected leader, then you have to say to people, look, this tough on crime stuff, it doesn't work. We have to be smart on crime. And here's the consequence of the tough on crime. You know, extraordinary expenses and destroyed lives and destroyed communities. And so likewise, you know, when we're talking about infrastructure investments, we have to say, do you want a strong country, a strong economy for our children and grandchildren? Well, then we better invest in our roads and bridges and our rail traffic and so on. We can't just let our infrastructure crumble and think there are no consequences. So I guess, you know, you have to support people who are willing to tell the truth instead of coddling people. And by support, I mean not just applauding when they speak, but giving them your money and time. So that's the obligation we all have if we want a strong democracy. Yes. Good morning.
The other question that you brought up in your speech this morning is all the different levels of government. Is there some movement that is taking place for consolidation? Is there any ideas out there? You know.
Well, so let me say again, Illinois has twice as many units of government as the next state, which is Pennsylvania, which has half as many as we do. Speaking of, this is a question of how you use your political capital. And what I usually say is if I were in office for 20 years, at about year 16, I'd work on consolidation, because the amount of political capital that you have to spend to try to make consolidation happen is just extraordinary. And frankly, I've chosen to spend my political capital on in 3 principal areas. 1, the sustainability of our public health system. Secondly, criminal justice reform. And 3rd, economic development, including things like freight and high-speed rail. So this is an important issue, but it's not one, frankly, given where I am, that I'm prepared to devote political capital to at the moment. The place where it should really come is at the state level. I mean, for example, I won't say most, many of our really small units of government are small school districts that are like 1 or 2 schools, and that have principals, but then they have the whole, superintendents and assistant superintendents and that whole bureaucracy for just a couple schools. And we don't have unified school districts, so the elementary schools are in one district and the high schools are in the other, although the elementary schools feed the high school, and you would think that they would want coordinated curriculum and programming and whatever, right? So, but the people of Illinois have made these choices to create these small units of government. And the people of Illinois, I think through their state legislators in Springfield, have to say that consolidation is important. It would save taxpayers money. It would lead to greater efficiency. And try to figure out how they're going to do it there. Yes, sir.
Why are senior citizens required to pay transit fare when the system is paid for and exists for the rush hour passes? Senior fares bring in maybe $5 to $10 million in CTA out of the budget of $1.43 billion. Isn't this what?
So let me say again, I am president of Cook County. I have nothing to do with the Chicago Transit Authority. I don't appoint the members. I don't have an appointee on the CTA board, although I have one on the RTA board and the Metro board. I think you're going to have to address your question to the CTA folks. There's some things that I will take responsibility for and be happy to answer questions. That's not one of them. We support the CTA. We give them $3 million a year, although, as I said, the county has no representation on the CTA board. Yes, we do support public transit in the city of Chicago with a $3 million contribution to CTA, and we have done so for as long as I can figure out. Yes?
I'm a freight railroad engineer, and I'm a little bit more familiar with Los Angeles transportation. I know the LAC MTA is very integrated, and I know what you just talked about is how not integrated Illinois politics are. But they have a dedicated transportation tax, Measure R, that's going to generate about $60 billion within a lifetime. And this November, they're going to put on the ballot to raise Measure R and also extend it to bring in an estimated $120 billion, I think it is. Do you see any dedicated transportation tax in feasibility on the horizon in Cook County or Illinois?
Well, we do have a regional tax with RTA.
Okay, yeah. I meant for capital expenditures. Capital construction.
So I think the priority at the state level is going to be to figure out how they're going to address the lack of state resources and the terrible budget deficit. So I guess I'd say in the short term, we'll be lucky if the state works out its problems and raises either income or sales tax. I think it's income tax to meet the state's needs. And so in the near term, trying to increase regional taxes for transportation is probably a long shot. Yes?
You mentioned to the pension problem in the state of Illinois, and I appreciate your comments, but intuitively it would seem to me that we would stop the bleeding by saying, okay, new employees no longer go into the defined benefit plan, and at least you would stop having the problem increase. But is there a political will for that?
So I will confess to some heresy here. I think the problem is not that we have defined benefit plans. I think we haven't been willing to fund them. So I was an alderman for 19 years. I mean, a city employee. They took my pension, now as a county employee, they take the pension payment 8.5% out of every paycheck. So I pay my fair share. And the county has always paid its pension obligations. The problem is that the state legislature in the 90s and the 2000s enhanced public pensions without demanding that employers pay more or employees pay more. And the reform legislation that we brought to Springfield, which we couldn't get them to pass, promised that we as employers would pay more, that employees would pay 10 or 10.5% of their salary, that they would extend their retirement, minimum age at retirement 5 years, that they would forego COLAs a couple of years in the pension plan. I mean, we had a package that involved shared sacrifice. The first time we brought it down to Springfield, the Republican nominee for governor, Rauner, refused to allow any Republicans in the House to support the bill, and the Speaker did not want a bill that was only Democrats voting for pension reform. So the measure did not, although it passed the Senate, didn't get out of the House. Last year, we started in the House because we knew that's where the problem was. Governor Rauner had asked me for some help. He wanted my chief financial officer to work with his team on pension reform. So my chief financial officer went down there for 6 or 8 weeks every Thursday and worked with them. It got to be the end of the session. I called up the governor and said, you know, you asked for help. I sent my chief financial officer down there who you have a high regard for. I'd like some help from you. If you could just give me a few Republican votes on this pension bill in the House, the Speaker would allow it to come out of the House. We have the votes in the Senate. We'll pass it. And he told me that I had to support his turnaround agenda, basically eviscerating the labor unions and changing workman comps rules and all those things. I said, listen, you asked me for help. I didn't ask you for anything. You know, this is an important issue, pension reform. I asked Ivan to come down there and work with you. He spent 20% of his time for more than a month. And you can't give me a couple Republican votes on this bill? No, he couldn't. So then I said to my team, we're going to have to figure out how to do this ourselves. And we entered into an intergovernmental agreement, which so far hasn't been challenged, to give more money to the pension fund just unilaterally to meet our obligations. If the legislature, in its enhancement of pensions in the 90s and the 2000s, had also demanded that workers pay more and that the employers pay more, we wouldn't be in this mess. And we particularly wouldn't be in this mess if at the state level there hadn't been, and at the city level too, there hadn't been these pension holidays when the executive decided that they would use the pension money for other purposes. So I think that it's not defined benefit plans, but irresponsibility on the part of the state legislature and various executives, both at the state and the city level, that has brought us to this mess. Yes?
Two-parter. What are your thoughts on the mayor and Commissioner Evans' thoughts on getting some O'Hare Express trains between the Loop and O'Hare, and its potential for accessing more of the city, as well as given all the different units of local government in Cook County that are working on transportation, what do you think your Department of Transportation's role might be in helping to bring some of these to the table to advance a high-speed rail?
Well, let's start with the second question first. Our long-range transportation planning process included city representatives and... Sure, I'm sorry. The question was, how can the county take a leadership role in transportation needs in the county? County government take a leadership role. And the second question was high-speed rail to O'Hare from downtown Chicago. So in our long-range transportation planning process, we tried to engage people from across the county, including city leadership, as well as folks from municipalities within the county outside the city. So I'm hopeful that we'll come up with a plan that we can secure broad support for and try to work on. So that's the first question. Second question. The first question is high-speed rail to O'Hare. Let me just, fess up here. When I was in the city council, I voted for a high-speed rail station in the sub-basement at Block 37, which is still there, and which an extraordinary amount of money was spent on, which has never been used. So I believed then it was a good idea, although it never came to fruition in the way that Mayor Daley envisioned. I still think it's a good idea, although how exactly we're going to work it out, I can't tell you because I'm not that familiar with it.
Great. Thank you, everybody.